In 1936, the British Empire still stretched across vast areas of the world, and young men commonly completed their education by working as administrators in far-off lands, though these experiences often changed them more than they changed the lands they served. In the port of Sowak, a ship arrives, and John, lost and confused, waits by the dock with his belongings, expecting someone to meet him. A young native man named Bansai, dressed in tribal clothing, introduces himself to John Truscott, welcoming him with a firm handshake and steadying the kayak they're using to reach the village. The locals watch John, the colonizer, as a curious spectacle. Bansai takes John to his boss, Henry Bullard, the district's governor with complete authority in the colony, while Bansai himself is set to become headman of the Longhouse in 2 years. Henry wonders why John, so overqualified, has come here. John explains he's here to continue his father's legacy. His father, a district officer, had aimed to educate the Iban community before he was martyred in the war. John feels it's his duty to educate these primitive people. Henry, confident that Sowak will change John, gives a quick overview, mentioning their talented yet infamous cook, and informs John of an invitation from the Longhouse Gok Kanong. Bansai will pick him up, but John still doesn't fully understand his job's details. The next day, John meets Malacca, Bansai's father and the Longhouse headman, amid curious children and women. Malacca offers rice wine, which John initially declines, only to gulp it down quickly after Bansai warns that refusal would be insulting. One woman, who served him, watches with fascination, meeting John's gaze until she leaves, and another drink is poured. The festivities continue into the night, where John marvels at an exotic dance performed by Selma, the girl who had served him earlier. When she finishes, she places her necklace around John's neck, binding him to entertain the crowd. He tries to recite an English poem, but when no one understands, he instead dances with Bansai, causing everyone to erupt in laughter. Soon everyone retires, and John, now overwhelmed with alcohol, falls asleep, seeing hazy visions of tribesmen holding a severed head. The next day, John confronts Henry about letting him make a fool of himself, but Henry laughs, explaining that the Iban people enjoy humor in drinking, violent games, and practical jokes. Shocked, John learns that the Iban beheaded trespassing Chinese miners and now expects him to recover these heads to build trust. Malacca then presents Selma to John, explaining that she will live with him as his sleeping dictionary, teaching him her language while also sharing his bed. Fluent in English due to her mother's role as a former sleeping dictionary, Selma chose John herself. Henry explains that John's contract forbids marriage for 3 years, but he'll return to England and likely marry a proper Englishwoman later, with Selma returning fluent in English. John, however, refuses on principle, suggesting that Selma stay but only as a language teacher. Offended, she reluctantly agrees. One rainy night, John finds his father's journal infested with ants, feeling overwhelmed by the unending rain and the strange customs. He calls out to Selma, merely to wish her good night, and by morning, Bansai hands him a bag of what he claims are Chinese heads. Selma, suspecting a prank, opens it to reveal monkey heads, storming off in anger at Bansai's joke. John attempts to assert authority, demanding the heads by morning or he'll confiscate the villagers' pigs, a threat that only amuses them. Returning to the bungalow, John meets Jasmine, famous assistant cook, who makes suggestive gestures, believing John has rejected Selma due to his orientation. Selma, frustrated, leaves the bungalow in a huff. The following morning, John discovers she's been sleeping beneath the bungalow, unable to return to the Longhouse for fear of ridicule over his rejection. John clarifies, apologizing for any misunderstanding, and admits he finds her beautiful but had refused due to his principles. Grateful for his honesty, Selma forgives him, as his words have restored her pride. John successfully negotiates an agreement with Famous regarding his drinking habits. He then encounters Aggie, who is clearing a section of jungle for a croc lawn by blasting coins into the bushes, prompting local children to search for them. She hopes to finish this before her daughter Cecilia arrives that night. John has a brief exchange with Selma, where he shares that he says goodnight to his father every night before bed. As they stand close under the doorframe, their intimacy grows, but they eventually part for the night. Selma asks John if he is a virgin, and he admits he is waiting until marriage. She finds this odd, suggesting that his lack of experience might lead to poor performance on their wedding night. John then extends his hand through the hole in the partition, holding Selma's hand and confessing he's never met anyone like her. Selma remarks that John didn't dance like an Englishman, and they both drift into sleep. John spends time with the village children when Bansai critiques the English educational system John is trying to implement, arguing it hasn't benefited him as the chief's son. John challenges Bansai to an underwater contest, despite Bansai being a seasoned champion. Malaka, Selma, and the other villagers watch eagerly as they compete underwater. Bansai surfaces frustrated after losing, while John emerges later, demonstrating the advantage of technology, having used an oxygen tank. Later, John hands over the heads he collected to Henry, who informs him that Cecilia will join them for Christmas dinner. That night, John and Selma explore a book that their parents read to them as children. Although Selma's mother took her to England when she was 4, she remembers the story by heart. John is impressed to see she can read English, prompting him to teach her words by writing on her arm. Their closeness intensifies as they share tender kisses, and he caresses her neck and lips while they learn words for different body parts. They share passionate moments together, but after their encounters, Selma leaves John's bed each time, adhering to Iban tradition, which considers waking up together for 5 nights as a sign of engagement. At dinner with Henry, Aggie, and Cecilia, John learns that Cecilia lived with her parents in the Iban village until she was 5 before returning to England for her studies. Now an anthropologist, she has written a thesis on the Iban people. John shares insights about Iban customs, surprising Cecilia with facts she didn't know. She laughs at the notion of the sleeping dictionary, while Henry awkwardly tries to steer the conversation away from uncomfortable realities. One of Henry's English guests, Neville, scoffs at the idea of an Iban woman and an Englishman forming a romantic connection. John challenges their derogatory comments about the Iban, angering Henry, who indirectly reminds John of his responsibilities to the local people and his country. Returning home, John finds Selma dressed in traditional attire, and they embrace and dance together throughout the evening. Cecilia captures moments of John communicating effectively with the Iban in their language and learns about a land dispute between 2 longhouses. Grateful for John's company and eager to avoid Neville, Cecilia is thrilled by the idea of a competition to settle the argument instead of favoring one tribe. She also expresses interest in photographing Selma's beauty, but John senses Selma's discomfort and is unable to intervene. John is then alerted to the body of a Yakata girl that washed up on the riverbank and learns of additional casualties. Determined to help, he plans to visit the Yakata people the next day, with Selma translating and Bansai mediating. That evening, Aggie corners John, urging him to pursue a relationship with Cecilia, suggesting that he could help set up schools for the Iban, aligning with his aspirations. Despite Aggie's attempts to persuade him, John is aware of her disapproval. Feeling neglected, John reflects on Neville's proposal for Cecilia's hand in marriage, knowing she will be gone for 2 years once she leaves for England. He apologizes to Selma for Cecilia's rude behavior and emphasizes that what he has with her is special. However, Selma, upset and feeling inadequate, insists that she will never be good enough for him, believing their relationship is merely physical. This disheartening conversation leaves John feeling defeated, and he spends the night alone in his bed. John and his team arrive at the edge of Yakata territory, where the tribe is known for their camouflage skills in the jungle. As John writes a letter to Cecilia, detailing the fierce, family-oriented Yakata warriors, they stumble upon more bodies of the Yakata people deeper in the forest. They find a community plagued by disease in a clearing, just as a white man attempts to shoot Jack. Thankfully, Bansai intervenes in time, and they quietly track the shooter to a nearby mining site. Jack discovers that Dutchmen are mining silver there, which motivates them to keep the truth hidden from other Europeans. When they return to the clearing, they find it deserted except for Selma, who has fallen ill and been abandoned by the others. The Yakata tribesmen surround them, believing Jack and his crew brought the disease. Jack realizes the Dutchmen must have poisoned the rice, causing the apparent sickness among the tribe to clear the area for mining. John reveals the truth to the Yakata, knowing they will seek vengeance against the Dutch miners. Jack, frightened by Selma's illness, confesses he wants to stay with her forever, but Selma knows they will have to run away to be together. John, however, is still hopeful about the English people's civility. The Yakata gifts Selma and Jack turquoise bracelets as a symbol of gratitude, but Jack's optimism falters when Henry reminds him of his duties. Henry, having fallen in love with a local in his past, urges Jack to make the right choice and fulfill his obligations. In a heated discussion, Jack insists he wants to marry Selma, attracting Aggie's attention, who takes Henry away for a private talk. Meanwhile, Malaka encourages Selma to find a husband among the iban, but she feels disloyal to Jack. Bansai warns Selma that Henry threatens to charge Jack and Bansai with murder if she doesn't give him up. Aggie offers Jack a year's leave to return to England, but if he refuses, he could face deportation and a 10-year prison sentence. Frustrated by his fellow countrymen's ruthlessness, Jack rushes to find Selma, who is disappointed and feels trapped in her situation. As John tries to free her, Henry and Neville arrive, with Henry issuing one final warning. When Selma decides to protect John by caving in, John and Cecilia marry in London a year later. On their wedding night, John removes the turquoise bracelet he received from the Akata people. Cecilia acknowledges that John must have had a sleeping dictionary, but she is relieved that he won't be as clueless as she is. Meanwhile, Jack reassures his wife that his sleeping dictionary has been married off to Bansai as they begin their own wedding night. John writes to Henry, stating that Cecilia wants to be close to her family and that they plan to return to Sowak, hoping for a fresh start. Upon their arrival, the children from the first iban class welcome Jack and Cecilia with the poem John once recited with Selma. They also encounter a bitter Neville, and Cecilia notices Jack's distracted behavior as he frequently glances at the iban people while the English enjoy their comforts. That night, she offers herself to him, playfully biting his shoulder, but Jack finds her actions strange. Embarrassed, she quickly covers herself, realizing she was trying to mimic Selma's behavior. After Neville reveals Jack and Selma's forbidden romance to Cecilia, she tells Jack that Selma is now happily married with a son. Jack promises Cecilia that he hasn't seen Selma in over a year. Hearing a commotion outside, they suspect it's Famous, who is often drunk. Cecilia senses that Famous still has feelings for Selma and insists that Jack fire him the next day. When Jack confronts Famous at Neville's bungalow, he discovers that Neville has been physically abusive toward his sleeping dictionary. Infuriated, Jack warns Neville's dictionary to fight back if he ever hits her again, a threat that unsettles Neville, who is still fixated on Cecilia. Jack overhears Aggie advising Cecilia not to pressure Jack into falling in love with her, framing their marriage as a convenient arrangement. Eventually, Jack encounters Selma a year later by the riverbank, where she is cuddling her son while Bansai stands behind her. Jack watches them with envy and sadness, realizing Selma is happy with her family. He rushes to Famous to confirm his suspicions, discovering that Selma's baby is actually his, not Bansai's. Jack attempts to bribe Famous to arrange a meeting with Selma, but she has made it clear she doesn't want to see him. To avoid trouble, Jack devises a plan to send Neville to a spot infested with leeches while Famous informs Selma that Neville's sleeping dictionary has been beaten up and needs her help. When Selma arrives at Neville's bungalow, she is shocked to find Jack waiting for her. He wants to meet his son, Mundar, but Selma initially ignores him. As he approaches, she reluctantly allows him to meet Mundar for a moment, reminding him that she will be in danger if anyone sees them together and insists that Mundar is Bansai's son since he agreed to marry her despite knowing she was already pregnant. Jack recites a memorable poem to Mundar, and later, Aggie observes him building a toy boat, leading her to assume he has impregnated Cecilia, which he denies. Aggie confesses to Jack that she stayed in Sarek with Henry not out of duty but out of insecurity, fearing he might run off to his native girl if she let him out of her sight. She warns Jack not to let the same fate befall her daughter. Jack secretly meets Selma again as Mundar plays with the toy boat Jack made for him. However, Neville catches the boat drifting down the river. Meanwhile, Bansai sneaks into John's bedroom, accidentally scratching his arm, causing Cecilia to wake up in horror upon seeing Selma's concern for Jack. Bansai's capture leads to Henry being faced with the painful task of executing one of the finest warriors he knows for attempting to kill a colonial officer. Henry has to ignore Jack, just as he once ignored Selma despite knowing she was his daughter. He entrusted her to Jack but wants to keep this a secret, believing it's the right thing to do, a stance Jack must now adopt. In court, Bansai remains honorable, refusing to shift blame onto a frenzy despite Jack offering him opportunities to do so. Jack adjourns the trial, planning to announce the verdict the next day. That night, Selma pleads with John to save Bansai, who is a good father to Mundar, while Cecilia observes from her bedroom. The Iban women attack Selma, but Henry intervenes and rescues her in front of his English family. Jack, heavy-hearted, sentences Bansai to death, while Henry finds himself in prison as preparations are made for Bansai's execution the following morning. Selma sneaks into Henry's bungalow to help Bansai escape and overhears how insecure Henry's family is about losing Jack, as they plot to keep him bound to Cecilia. She gives Jack the keys to free Bansai, who is given a gun for protection as he disappears into the jungle. Jack proposes that he and Selma run away together, setting a time and place for their meeting, vowing to choose her above all else. Aggie maliciously assigns Selma as Neville's sleeping dictionary while Cecilia reveals her pregnancy to Jack. Stuck at dinner with Cecilia and her parents, Jack is unable to escape the situation as Neville imposes himself on Selma. Famous retaliates against Neville, allowing Selma to escape with Mundar. Cecilia confesses to Jack that she does not want to be his second choice and deserves true love. She hugs him goodbye, promising to keep everything secret until morning. By the time Selma and Mundar reach the dock, they are drenched from the rain, but Jack is not there. When Jack arrives, he learns the ship has already left. Fortunately, Famous is still hiding there and informs Jack that Selma thought he wouldn't come, prompting her to flee to Dutch territory and head to the old mine. Henry encounters Selma during her escape and offers her his gun instead of shooting her, only to learn she has known he was her father all along. They share a hug, the first and last, before she sails away. Meanwhile, Cecilia and Henry prevent Aggie from causing further trouble, even as she sends Neville on a manhunt for Selma. With Famous's help, Jack finds Selma using her photograph as a guide. They reunite on a mountaintop, but just as they embrace, Neville catches them. Fortunately, the Akata people arrive in time to kill Neville, saving Jack and Selma. The Akata tribe invites Jack and Selma to join them as they relocate to a new village. The next day, Jack and Selma happily accept the offer, knowing that all they need is each other and their son, no matter where life takes them.